The deadness.
Yeah.
We consider last year. We're considering the deadness. That's what we're doing. We're considering the deadness.
Right.
If Abraham had continued to consider the deadness, he never would have appeared as the father of many nations, nor would he have been exceedingly fruitful.
Right.
If he would have kept considering the deadness. And that's kind of what the world teaches us, to consider all of the deadness.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And then in light of all this deadness, how can we have peace? How can we have love? How can we have joy? And I never really saw, I saw this thing with Abraham for many, many years now, but I never saw it so quite clearly in the sense of it being a description of something every human being has had going on inside of them. Like an echo in their heart. How will you give me peace, love, joy, kindness, long-suffering, Lord, in light of this body of death I have? In light of all this death and corruption I'm surrounded by in the world, in light of all the things that happened in 2016, in light of how bad 2017 has begun now, how will you give me peace, love, joy? So you're considering the deadness, right? And the more you consider the deadness, the more that hopeless sound's going to come out. And the hopelessness is how will I have these things in light of that?
Yeah.
And now what happens is, as you consider all that, you begin focusing on the deadness. Then your mind begins telling you if that deadness can just be conquered, then you'll have peace, then you'll have love, then you'll have joy. Now what that does is it causes you to start laboring and toiling in your heart to conquer the deadness, right? Instead of your mind being washed clean, where you no longer consider the deadness, even should the deadness be there. Right? Your heart begins to disesteem the deadness, meaning that your heart doesn't consider the deadness, but your heart considers the one who promised and the life of the one who promised and the sufficiency of the life of the one who promised. Right? And then that starts doing something inside of you where you no longer consider your deadness. When you stop considering the deadness you see in your life and all around you, that's the foundation from where you start finding peace and love and joy manifesting in you. That's what it is. And that's why God comes to take our eyes off of the deadness we see in our own lives and all around us and even in the people's lives that we love. And He comes to set our eyes on Him and His life, because when we begin to look into Him and His life, we find something dynamic out about His life. It can't die. It can't be corrupted. It can't end. It can't be overcome. It can't be kept from manifesting. Now, when you begin thinking that about your own life, it gives you a certainty that nothing can keep good from manifesting in your life. That's the foundation for being filled with all joy. If your mind is always busy thinking about how nothing can stop life from manifesting, no matter what you experience, maybe you're dying on a cross. Nothing can keep life from manifesting.
That's right.
You see, you have a confident expectation will strengthen your heart.
Yeah.
In the midst of all death, and you'll feel joy in the midst of all death, because you won't be considering the death that you're dying, but you'll be considering the life that you have in God, and you'll start thinking about that life, and you'll start thinking about how nothing can keep that life down, nothing can conquer that life, nothing can keep that life from manifesting. You'll start walking through the next thing you know, your smile went from this to just turn that frown upside down. Next thing you know, by the end of your thinking about the life you have in God, man, you're filled with all joy. And that's how the dynamic works.
Yeah.
And that's what went down with Abraham. And Abraham didn't do that himself. It wasn't by Abraham's goodness that happened. God did that to Abraham. He fixed Abraham's eyes on him as Abraham's sufficiency. And then God once again come and did the same thing to all of us in Jesus. He come to do the same thing in us that He did in Abraham. And the way that He does it is He reveals Himself once again in the resurrection as El Shaddai. To cause us to no longer consider the deadness we see, but to only consider the one who promised and the life that He promised and the substance of that life. Then we become strengthened with a confident expectation. Abraham had a certainty that he would be the father of many nations.
Yes, he did.
And he had a certainty that nothing could keep that from happening, and nothing could keep him from being exceedingly fruitful. So it didn't matter what he saw.
Right.
He was filled with joy.
Didn't matter if he went and killed his son. It was still going to happen.
That's right.
Still going to happen.
And that's the evidence that he was believing in the resurrection.
Right.
And Hebrews interprets that beautifully. Abraham, who said, even should he die, God is able to. See, Abraham is talking in his heart about God's sufficiency.
Right.
He knew God was the one who could conquer death. So even should Isaac die, that can't keep me from being the father of many nations. But wait a second, the world would say, but Abe, the promise was through Isaac.
Yeah.
So if Isaac dies, then how are you going to be the father of many nations? That's considering deadness.
Right.
See, he didn't consider that. See, the carnal mind would consider that. Be like, no. How are you going to be the father if the promised seed dies? Jesus is actually the promised seed. Just so everybody knows, Isaac is a type and a shadow. But Jesus being raised from the dead is actually what enabled Abraham to be the father of many nations. He is the promised seed, and guess what? He did die.
Yeah.
And guess what? He was raised from the dead.
That's right.
So even the promised seed dying couldn't keep Abe from being the father of many nations. Right?
That's what the scripture was talking about.
Yeah.
It said, unless a seed dies.
Yeah. And that's just a beautiful thing for me, and just meditating on the life of Abe and what was really happening there, and what's going on, and how much of Abe's thinking was resurrection thinking, right? And all to point us to the resurrection, considering the resurrection. And everybody, you might think, well, I don't know that I understand all the ins and outs like you're talking about, Greg, or like you understand. What you can do is you can leave and you can just say to God, I want to know you and the power of your resurrection
And go. Yep.
and the fellowship of your sufferings. And I want the persuasion in my heart to be made conformable to the death I died with Christ. You died with Christ to death.
Sure.
So the only thing to consider about death is that you're dead to
You're
it.
dead.
Yes. Like a zombie to death.
Right. And listen, that was two of the most powerful prayers of my whole life, way back when I didn't know anything. Somehow, the Lord told me to pray to see Jesus in all the scriptures, when I didn't yet fully know that every scripture was about Jesus. And guess what I found that he did? He showed me Jesus in all the scriptures. It wasn't because I was special, but I actually wanted to see Jesus in all the scriptures. And then the other most powerful prayer was I saw what Paul said. In light of, I count all this as done for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ and the power of his resurrection. And so then that was my prayer. Lord, forget everything else. Forget having money. Forget having a ministry. Forget having cars. Forget having jobs. Forget having all the things that supposedly the gospel will now give me. I want to know you and the power of your resurrection and the fellowship of your sufferings. And I want my heart to be made conformable to the death I died with Christ. Guess what? He's doing it. And he did it. And he's still doing it. And it was all because I just prayed that. Do you see what I'm saying? If I had to attribute any of my understanding to anything, it would be to those prayers. It would not be to my much studying, although I've studied.
Yeah.
And I love to study.
Right.
But I studied a long time before those prayers, and I didn't see nothing compared to what I see now. And so everybody can pray that prayer. It's not like, oh, that's a magical thing for Greg, and Greg and God have some special dynamic that no one else can have. No, that's BS, man.
Yeah.
Everybody can have it. It's just I actually wanted to know him more than everything else. And everybody else can live from that same place and just ask him. It's a simple thing, man. And he's already wanting to do it anyway. If you pray that prayer, and now that I look back, I can see that was actually me functioning in the Godhead as Son. God actually brought that forth in my heart. Said, Greg, let us bring about this persuasion in you. And I didn't even understand the dynamic yet, but out of my heart, when I prayed the prayer, that was me saying, let us with God. Yeah, let us. And see, the same thing can happen for anybody else.
When I first